Welcome to Rick's Europe. This week, a report was presented to the Swedish government regarding the potential increase in subsidies for repatriation. The report concludes that significant raising of subsidies for immigrants to return to the home country will actually not increase the return to the home country, but could actually in fact damage the integration process. And to get a better understanding of this report and its conclusions and implications, with me today is our new editor-in-chief, Elias.
Thank you for having me.
To start off with this, this study says that if you would increase the significant budget for people to get subsidies to return to the home country, it will only lead to a number of 700 migrants going back home. And it makes one wonder, what could explain that such a substantial increase in budget does not have has very limited impact?
Well, I think for one, the money that we're supposed to be giving to migrants to return to their home countries is a nice incentive in and of itself. That's a lot of money that's being proposed to be handed out. But there are many other incentives, many more incentives for staying in Sweden and living on welfare. And that's probably true for most Western European countries. In fact, it's rather easy to just get a living by just accumulating welfare money. And this is probably more alluring to most people who have come here as what one might call welfare tourists, rather than going home to their own countries. And there might be many other reasons for why a migrant might not want to return to their home country, no matter how much money they're given. I mean, some of them are at least claiming to be coming from persecuted minorities or whatever it may be that has caused them to supposedly escape from their home country. So there are a lot of complications to this. Obviously, it's not as easy as just giving people money and getting them to go back. There's a lot of factors at play here. And this is all, of course, it should be said, this is all, of course, assuming that this report is correct. I mean, 700 people is a very low number. I personally believe that it's probably, the real number is probably much higher if you were to be handing out this type of money to people to go back to their home country. I don't believe 700 every year is near the realistic number.
Okay, because now we're starting to talk about the limitations of the research. Why do you think this number is incorrect? Who actually even paid for this research to start off with? Because, I remember when I did my master's, they always told us, see who paid and funded the research to know what the bias potentially could be in the outcome and the conclusions of the research.
Well, this is a government-commissioned report, and it was conducted by a researcher who's been quite famous in Sweden for some time for having done an interview on public service where he laid out the foundational facts for why asylum seekers cost money, and that became sort of a media phenomenon in Sweden. Like, why would a researcher say this? Why would they claim that asylum seekers cost money? So that's why this person who has delved into the economic costs of migration for a long time was handed this mission. Joachim Röist is his name. But as it turns out, if you were to get a little conspiratorial about this, I mean, this is still a researcher who has, as far as I can tell, is pro-migration. So that might have affected the outcome of and just the methods that he has resorted to using. When it comes to the reliability of this, the most criticized aspect of this report is that having granting a remigration grant is actually something that will damage integration. That is to say, it will make migrants feel as they're unwanted in the country. It will cause them to become more asocial, probably commit more crimes, etc., things of that nature. And that's something that has been pointed out by many of the recipients in the government and also in media, that this is basically an unfounded claim. There's nothing that actually proves that granting large subsidies for people to go back to their home country actually causes them to behave more asocially or more criminally. So that's what these aspects are all about. That's why politicians are actually calling this report just a failure and not to be regarded as anything to base their decisions on. Which is also why the politicians in the current government are moving on to raising this grant to get people to go home, even though they don't have this research behind them.
Yeah, but that sounds pretty alarming because it's a government-funded research, so it's paid by tax money. It is really worrying that tax money is being used by making these false claims that are not even backed up by actual research, by facts and numbers and statistics, as it should be. And I think another concern is that what was pointed out is that, of course, we have the example of Denmark, where they did increase the budget and the subsidies for repatriation, and it did lead to a number of immigrants going back home to their home country. Could you please elaborate on that?
Well, yeah, that's what this research was based on. It was actually these methods in Denmark and how they're using repatriation grants to get people to go back to their home countries. And there's no, as far as I can tell, there's no indication that this has actually caused migrants to become more criminal, to become more asocial, to become more ambivalent to the society that they live in. It doesn't cause them to be more hostile. So that's why all of these people, politicians, are questioning this report based on this. Now, I don't want to entirely discredit this research and this paper, because I think there's something to be said about, obviously, if the government is going out far and wide and saying that we can give you money if you go back to your home country, that will actually cause some disaffection in these groups that are concerned, mainly groups of migrants that come from particular countries in the Middle East or Africa, or whatever group that might be targeted by this sort of campaign. So I can understand why this concern exists. It's just that it hasn't really been substantiated.
But on the other side, like, for example, I'm from the Netherlands, and there was this proposal to give immigrants 5,000 euros if they would go back home. And this is like asylum seekers, when they out of procedure, they have to return home. To give an extra incentive to go home, they would get some money from the government. And as you can imagine, this also really unleashed some backlash from citizens, from the society, because everywhere in the world, especially in Europe, we have a very high number of inflation. People are having to deal with the fact that they cannot pay for their living, for housing, electricity, energy, food. So it makes you wonder, why are we giving so much money? Are there not any other methods available that are possibly even more effective?
Well, I think one of the most, as I was alluding to earlier, one of the leading incentives for migrants to stay in Sweden, to stay in Western Europe, is because we have such generous welfare programs. And generally, I think that restricting the access to this welfare, for example, you'd have to be a citizen to get access to schooling, to healthcare, and whatever it might be. That would actually cause a lot of people to, first of all, it will dissuade them from coming here to begin with, and it will also probably convince a lot of people that don't belong in this country culturally to go back to where they came from. So I think that's the approach that governments need to be using, instead of handing out money to people who probably see more incentive in just staying here and living on welfare. However, I think that there's something to be said about combining these methods, because a lot of these people who come from Africa and the Middle East, or whatever it may be, Central Asia, they're not very wealthy, obviously. They would need to have some sort of money to reestablish themselves in their home country. And that's where I think these types of repatriation grants will be very useful, actually. And I think that it's a good thing that the government is now looking at increasing the sum that they're willing to give to migrants, however that might sound. I mean, we're giving away money for free to people who don't ostensibly deserve it. But that's my take on it, at least.
Well, let's hope that the government is watching and taking some notes from Elias. We're very happy to have you as the editor-in-chief, and we're looking forward to see you more on the channel. Thank you.
You will.
Of course, thank you for our watchers for watching.